Okay, real quick question. What if I told you that right now, a totally normal American guy, not a soldier, not a government official, not some secret billionaire, just some dude named Gary from Ohio, legally owns a fully operational military tank, and not just Gary. There are hundreds of them, regular civilians, with tanks, sitting in their driveways, legally, no loophole, no underground deal, no crime, completely legal. And the craziest part? The law that allows this has been on the books for decades. Your government knows about it, and they're totally fine with it. So today we're going to answer the question nobody's teacher ever brought up in school. Why on earth can you legally own a tank in the United States of America? Let's get into it. First things first, let's just confirm this is not a joke, not a rumor, and not some weird loophole that got closed in 1987. It is completely legal for a private American citizen to purchase, own, and drive a military tank. Not a toy tank, not a paintball tank, a real, metal, multi-ton, I could theoretically crush a Prius military tank. Now, before you start Googling cheapest tank for sale, let's slow down and talk about how this is even possible. Because the answer has everything to do with one very specific law, the National Firearms Act of 1934, and another one called the Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. Here's the key detail that makes all of this work. The United States government doesn't actually regulate what size of vehicle you can own. They regulate weapons. Specifically, they care about the guns, the cannons, the things that go boom. The tank itself? Just a vehicle. A big, heavy, absolutely terrifying vehicle. But legally speaking, just a vehicle. So if you buy a tank that has no live ammunition, no working cannon, and you make it street legal, you are good to go, brother. Now let's break down what you actually need to do to legally own a tank in America. Because yes, there are rules. They're just not what you'd expect. Rule number 1, the main gun has to be disabled or deactivated. This is the big one. If your tank still has a functional cannon capable of firing live rounds, that cannon is classified as a destructive device under the National Firearms Act. And destructive devices require a very specific federal license that costs money, involves a background check, and a waiting period that'll make you want to take a nap. But, and this is a beautiful, but if the cannon is welded shut or permanently deactivated, totally fine. You can park that bad boy in front of your house and wave at your neighbors from the hatch. Rule number 2, it needs to be street legal in your state. This means lights, mirrors, and in some cases, rubber tracks instead of metal ones, because metal tracks will absolutely destroy the road. Some states require it to be registered like any other vehicle. Some don't care at all. And rule number 3, you still have to follow local laws. Some cities and counties have zoning, rules about what you can keep on your property. So technically, your HOA might have more power over your tank situation than the federal government, which is kind of hilarious when you think about it. But outside of those 3 things, you're golden. Completely, legally golden. All right, so you're on board. You want a tank. Reasonable. Where do you get one? Option 1, government surplus auctions. When the military retires old equipment, it sometimes ends up at auction. Now, most of the really dangerous stuff gets dismantled or sold to allied governments. But occasionally, a vintage tank will slip through and end up available to civilians. Option 2, private military dealers. Yes, these exist. There are actual companies in the United States, totally legal, totally licensed businesses, that specialize in buying, restoring, and reselling vintage military vehicles. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, half-tracks, you name it. You can literally go to their website, pick a tank like you're shopping on Amazon, and have it delivered. Well, not like Amazon Prime delivered, but delivered nonetheless. Option 3, international purchases. Countries like the UK, Israel, and several former Soviet states have decommissioned tanks available for export. Some American collectors specifically hunt European battlefields for vintage World War II vehicles, restore them, ship them home, and register them. And in case you're wondering about price, because of course you are, a basic decommissioned tank can run you anywhere from $50,000 on the low end to over $500,000 for a well-restored, historically significant model. which honestly is less than some people pay for a luxury car. Just saying. Now let's talk about the people who actually went through with it. Because they exist. And their stories are incredible. One of the most famous private tank owners in American history was a guy named Jacques Littlefield. He was a Silicon Valley businessman who spent decades collecting military vehicles. By the time he was done, he had assembled a private collection of over 200 military vehicles, including dozens of fully functional tanks, on his California ranch. His collection was so significant that military historians considered it one of the most important in the world. Some of his tanks were literally the last surviving examples of their type on the planet. Then there's the small town of Mosinee, Wisconsin, which is famous for hosting a real-life tank parade every year. Private collectors drive their tanks through the streets. Families come out to watch. Kids sit on top and take pictures. It is the most uniquely American thing you can possibly imagine. And then there's the story that went viral a few years back. A man in San Diego who was apparently upset with his city government decided to express his frustration by stealing a National Guard tank and going on a joyride through the streets. Now, to be very clear, he stole that tank. Completely illegal. And things did not end well for him. But the story spread around the world precisely because of everyone's reaction. Wait, those are just out there? You can just get to them? Yes. Yes, you can. If you do it legally. So here's the real question. Why? Why does the United States government look at a 70-ton armored vehicle and go, yeah, sure, let civilians have that? The answer is actually rooted in something pretty fundamental to how American law was written. The legal framework in the U.S. tends to operate on a principle of, unless it's specifically prohibited, it's permitted. In other words, the law doesn't say, here's everything you're allowed to own. It says, here's what you're not allowed to own. And then everything else is fair game. Tanks as vehicles were never specifically banned from civilian ownership. The weapons on tanks are regulated. The vehicle itself was just never put on the restricted list. There's also a practical historical argument. For decades, private collectors have served as a kind of unofficial museum system for military hardware. The U.S. government doesn't have the resources, or frankly the interest, to preserve every decommissioned vehicle. So private collectors do it. They restore these machines, they maintain them, they preserve history, which is why you'll find museums across America filled with tanks that are technically owned by private individuals, not the government. It's a weird, accidental, very American solution to historical preservation. So there you have it. You can legally own a tank in the United States. You need to deactivate the main weapon, make it road legal, and keep your HOA off your back. That's basically it. Gary from Ohio has one. Jacques Littlefield had 200. And somewhere in Wisconsin, families are lining the streets to watch a tank parade on a Tuesday afternoon. Only in America. If you made it this far, first of all, thank you. Second of all, drop a comment. What would you do if you legally owned a tank? Because I have some ideas. And most of them involve drive-thrus. See you in the next one.